As a mental health campaigner, Ruby Wax is all about breaking the illness's taboos. So it was quite surprising to hear that she has recommended that people with mental health problems should lie to their bosses and keep it secret because of the stigma. It's quite a controversial position that she's taken on this. Do you agree with it?
But I think she's right, actually. But I think she's right because of the stigma. Because I think even if you say to a boss, well, I suffer from anxiety or depression, the first thing they're going to think, a potential boss, is going to think, well, that means they're going to take loads of time off, or they don't understand it. I mean, I did a charity event recently with a lot of wounded soldiers, and for the guys with a missing arm or no legs, it was almost kind of easier for them to deal with it because the public go, oh, you're a hero, you've lost your leg, or God, poor you. And the guys that were really struggling were the ones with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, from what they'd seen, because they said people don't understand it, and they're just kind of like, oh, get a grip, you know, come on, you know. And that's the attitude. So whilst that is the attitude, I think she's right to say, lie to get a job, because in an ideal world we'd say we're going to change everybody's attitudes. But are we?
Well, one of the things she says as well in the interview is that mental health is like the situation used to be with gay rights, like being in the closet, but mental illness is the taboo instead. Do you think that's the case?
I think the problem is that mental illness is all in one big pot, and there's so many layers of different categories of mental illness. And so I think you're right, I think to walk in and a boss, you know, if you had to tell a boss you had mental illness, which again, you know, in an ideal world you should be able to, but then you've got to put yourself in the boss's position as well. Like you said, he'll think, well, how severe?
What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Because I mean, you read in the newspaper of a terrible event happening. So somebody has an incident in the street, people have been killed, and it reports in the newspaper say they were suffering from mental illness, and that's under the same umbrella as someone who, in days gone by, would have said, oh, she's always has a problem with her nerves, and that, in effect, is mental illness.
Like the plane crash. Not so long ago when the plane went into the French Alps.
Yes.
And they later found out that he'd had mental illnesses, and he'd been to like 12 different doctors, and none of the doctors were able to report this issue because of the doctor's oath, which is an area which they've been trying to discuss, whether at what point the doctors are responsible for letting someone like a pilot's company know that there's a problem when they've got people's lives at risk.
So I suppose it depends on the type of job that you're going for, whether it's actually relevant or not.
But you know, all that would happen is, so say if you're a boss is interviewing a 26-year-old woman who's saying, oh, I've just got engaged, they're not allowed to say, oh, that means you're going to have a baby as soon as you start work. But a lot of them, that's what they would be thinking. So what they do is they give the job either to an older woman who's had her children and just say, oh, that you didn't have the right qualifications. And I think, again, that would happen if you were honest about your mental illness. They would never say, oh, well, I'm not going to employ you because you might be off with depression the whole time. But subliminally inside their head, they would just not employ you.
I think we need to find different terminologies for it because the umbrella is so huge. I had postnatal depression after I had Amy. It was something that I dealt with by myself for 2 years before I even sought help for it. And thank God I did, because obviously I was put on tablets and that helped clear my mind, and then I came out the other side and all was well. I've suffered from panic attacks in my 20s, first moving down to London and, you know, thinking you're coping really well. And my first was on the Underground. Suddenly I was, you know, I'd been pushed aside by a very angry commuter, and it came out of nowhere. I'd never had it happen before. And you know, I find it difficult even today. I can feel my anxiety rising because I'm actually talking about it. But one of the reasons I want to is because I had a very public one here moments before going on air, and it ended up that luckily, lovely Ruth was doing this morning. She raced across and took over, and that was because my marriage had broke down just a few weeks before, and I'd held that in, not spoken about it. And all I can describe it was this feeling of rising, because you try and keep a lid on how stressed you are and that sort of thing.
Like a pressure cooker.
It is like a pressure cooker.
Wonderful that you're talking about it, and this is what we need to have. It's that open conversation, that dialogue, where future employees are able to go in and discuss it, and like you said, break it down, not just have that umbrella
I
title.
definitely think so,
and say, well,
yeah.
this is actually the area that I'm having issues with. I'm under a doctor, I'm taking medications, so everything's in control, and just be able to share
and
that.
stop thinking of it as a weakness.
Yeah.
You know, I think
That's
the reason
the
you don't
problem,
talk is
yeah.
you don't talk a lot about your personal
And as we can see, you'll do your job very capably. You know, it's not like it's going to affect your career. And I think that's
I'm
what a lot
fine
of
now.
cases-
I was going through a very difficult... I mean, anyone who's been through a marriage breakdown knows how traumatic that is. And because you hold yourself together for your children, for your family, you don't want anyone to worry about you, I think sometimes if you could just say, do you know what, I'm struggling a little bit, and not have that... I don't think of myself as having mental health issues. I just had a bit of a wobble.
Do you agree
all.
with Ruby Wax?
Yeah, I do agree with her. Yeah. I do. Because of the stigma. I was feeling anxious just knowing we were going to talk about it today in an abstract manner. And so to go for a job interview and have to hold your hand up and say, sometimes I have a bit of a wobble, is a difficult one.
What I say is misrepresented. I say that Amy didn't need to go to rehab, right?
Yeah.
What I actually said was, referring to 2005, an incident, Amy didn't need to go to rehab at that point.